constraint drives creativity, right? If you have, $10 million, then what are you going to do? You're going to throw money at it, right? When you don't, you got to figure it out, and the best part of human ingenuity is that without, just to throw money at a problem, you got to figure out ways to connect and grow and get the next connection and make it to the next stage. So,
hey everyone, I'm Peter Barron.
And I'm Brendan Schneider.
Yeah, and welcome to the Leadership Backstory. Brendan, today we have Jason Brooks on the show. Hey Jason, how are you?
Hey, doing well. How are you guys?
Yeah, good. Yeah, Jason, so glad that you're here with us today. You and I had a chance to talk not long ago. You've got a really it's so interesting to see like the work that you've done in schools and how you're translating that into a startup environment. And I have a lot of appreciation for that journey. It's a unique one, and I know there's a lot that we can gain. So yeah, welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Excited to be here.
Talk about your journey. I mean, one of my greatest research tools here, and for Brendan and I, is LinkedIn. So I'm looking at your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah, it is.
But you've got this long history of working in schools and going to an independent boarding school too. And now you've got a startup that's leveraging AI. And, before we get all the way to where you are today, like talk about how your journey started. Like what did that look like?
Yeah. So I grew up in Watts, late 80s, early 90s, right? So for all of the folks out there who danced in college to the song California Love, right? When there's that little part where it's City of Compton, City of Watts, right? So that's
Are we going to be humming that for the whole show, for the whole episode now? Right?
Yeah. You might, right? They call that the earworm. But, when I grew up, it was rough. It was rough, right? It was late 80s. You got the Bloods, you got the Crips, and you had the third gang, the LAPD, and you're trying to navigate all of that. Ironically, my dad was, I don't know if ironic is just sort of how I grew up, but my dad was a cop for 25 years as well. So inside the home, had a ton of order, like won the parent lottery off the charts in terms of the folks who were raising us. But then outside all that turmoil, and to just give you a sense of like my dad's a cop, 25 years, and then my mom, there's 6 of us kids, right? My parents like really enjoy each other's company. So there's 6 of us and I'm the eldest. There's 4 girls and my little brother. So like, I'll never forget my dad kind of grabbing me by the scruff of the neck and be like, make sure your sisters get home safely. It's like, oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, sir. Right. So like, even as I reflect on it, I came across this quote the other day and I love it, but like pressure is a privilege, right? Yeah. And like even the pressure of having, a 9-year-old kid, but to have to bring my sisters home safely to make sure that we can get to and from the park safely, to be able to navigate, the challenges of growing up is really where it started for me. And, as I got older, it was sort of participating and kind of like, again, like this in the house is awesome, but then you step outside of the home and you got to be aware of all different sorts of challenges. And 2 things started to emerge. One is that like I really like sports, and the other is that I was kind of okay at school. And then I think that's what you call the humble brag, right? But then then took a test and ended up at an all boys boarding school out in Claremont, right? So went from the hood to Hogwarts, and it totally changed my life. Like to go from Watts to Claremont, to be around incredible people really accelerated. And frankly, changed the trajectory of my life. Like when I go visit my parents all the time, and nobody, and I say this with such reverence and respect, but nobody I grew up with is there anymore, right? They're all either dead or in jail. Like, so it's a really bittersweet thing to kind of go back and have the memories of like, oh, this is where, the streets are always so much smaller, right? When you come back as adults, like, oh, I used to play this all day as a kid, but now nobody's there. So that's sort of the genesis, and happy to keep going from there. But
yeah, well, talk about web, because, when I look at your journey, you spent years working in independent schools, and, what role did web play in that for you?
Yeah, I think so. In terms of my formation as a man, I don't know if I'm more indebted to an organization. Namely that when I was 14, at every turn, every nook and cranny, every branding, every possible opportunity, they like inculcated us with the Latin phrase principes non homines, right? Which is leaders, not common men. So we had to eat our food like a leader. You had to fold your books like a leader, make up your bed like a leader, right? You are not common. You're not common. They just drilled that into us. And there, I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of opinions. Mine is one of 8 billion. But for me, what I needed was single sex education at that point in my life, right? So remember, there's six kids. I've got 4 sisters. My brother hadn't yet come along. My dad is working graveyard. He's a cop, 12, 18-hour days. So it's really me and then my 4 sisters and my mom. So I was like really in a single sex education until 13, just being around a ton of women, which is awesome, and to balance some of that out for 4 years to be at an all-boys school was amazing because I not only had the opportunity to explore some parts of myself that I'll just kind of put it blankly, right? So I just know that the 14-year-old version of me, if given the chance to really buckle down and talk with maturity about the rape scene in The Kite Runner, or to kind of make a dumb joke to kind of crack the tension that's in the room in a code environment, I would have been the dumb, class clown, right? We know that, like, guys do that. Guys in particular do that, across classrooms across the world, and have done that for centuries because, there's not that emotional maturity. But for me to be able to develop that at Webb and really have to wrestle with high octane classmates and really aware teachers was fantastic. And then that's just the school day. So you go from there to school day, boom. And then, you take a 30-minute break and then you're now off to practice. So you see the same person who's your English teacher, who's now your basketball, football, volleyball coach, lacrosse coach, right? And you're like, oh my goodness, I've never seen, Mr. Thompson get that fired up. So you now get to see a full dynamic human being in a bunch of different scenarios. And then right after practice, right, you go to the dining hall. So I've seen Mr. Thompson in English class at lacrosse practice, and now I've seen him, disciplining his kids in the dining hall, right? So like for a young guy who's 14 to 18, I mean, boarding school was the best possible experience for me because I got to see over the course of 4 years, hundreds of different examples of what manhood looked like, both from my classmates to people who've been there for their whole career, to see their families. It was just a magnificent experience.
As we're going to get into this, I know, Jason, but you transition a lot. You've got some great career changes. So transition seems comfortable to you. Was the transition, as you say, and I can't wait to read your book, from Hood to Hogwarts? That should be the title of your book, by the way.
Yeah.
How was that, going to Webb for the first time?
Yeah. It's hard. It's really, really difficult. I think looking back with the hindsight with hindsight, I think it sort of makes sense, but you're a 14-year-old kid. You go, I'll never forget that. I'll tell you a story. So I'm like, from the hood, my first meal at Webb is beef stroganoff, right? So like pasta and gray meat, right? And like the dining hall staff was so proud of themselves. Like, this is our best meal. And I was like, what the hell is this like gray meat on pasta? Like, where's the marinara sauce? Like, this is not like my mom's chili. Like this is, so it was like that first clash of like, oh, I'm not in Kansas City anymore. Your first formal dinner, you got formal dinners 3 times a week. there's more knives and forks and spoons on the table than we had in our whole house. I was like, oh my God. Like, and then you're eating this like outside in, you're like, there's a knife for butter? Like there's just one knife. All its job is to cut butter? Like, are you kidding me? Right? So it was those sorts of transitions were difficult. But I'm so grateful for all the people, my parents included, who helped me get there, and the people who took care of me there, because it normalized to challenge at an early age. Like doing difficult things was considered normal and not impressive. Yeah. I'm so glad to have received that gift. And even the more spicy parts of my experience there were, you imagine you get 200 boys locked up in a dorm, some things are going to get said, some, you're going to have to sort some things out, but that was awesome because I had to do it, right? There's no person I could call like, hey mom, this guy called me this, or hey mom, like this is happening. Like, oh no, you've got to figure these things out. So to have that maturity, that forced maturity at 14 only helps later on.
So let's talk about later on. So you went to college back east, right?
I went to Trinity in San Antonio, Texas.
San Antonio, Texas, sorry. Yeah, Trinity, so you went to Trinity. And then from there, it looks like you jumped into the independent school space as a teacher. like those early days teaching, and Fountain Valley School in Colorado was the first place. What kind of leadership lessons were you building along the way? Because I'm hearing like leadership lessons that were plucked while you were at Webb, and I'm curious, like, how did that start to continue to evolve as you got into your young professional career?
Yeah. So I think kind of going back to college, like one of the things that Webb, I mean, they really did. I mean, I know I'm using like a 37-cent word here, but like they really did inculcate leadership, like leaders, not common men, into everything. So much so that I didn't even recognize it. Right. So my freshman year of college, was in a fraternity, right? And then very quickly just started doing stuff because this is how you operate. Like somebody's got to take out the trash. Somebody's got to organize it. Somebody's got to do, you know, the things that it takes to get things done. Like parties just
all those skills that you like lived every day.
Exactly. Right. And you think about like, I was playing lacrosse and ran track as well. And you're like, okay, within first couple of years of college, then I'm a captain and then pledge master and then ultimately president and captain of the team. And I just kind of woke up, you know, at 22 being like, whoa, like, all right, maybe it's part of my personality. Maybe I like to be in charge, or maybe there is some skill here. And then when it came time to, I mean, you got to graduate. You can't stay there forever. I'll never forget the director of admission at my high school had since transitioned to a different school, but he called me up and was like, hey, like, you gotta come teach, like you're made for it, you know. And I grew up a poor kid, right? I grew up a poor kid going to these independent schools. I was like, there's no way I'm teaching. I'm gonna go be a business major. I'm gonna run as far away from education as I can. My mom was a teacher. I know what that looks like. No. But the gravitational pull sort of brought me back in. And I think it was the ability to both pass on the lessons that I had learned, right? So we talked a little bit earlier about the way I grew up and like just seeing not everybody make it from where I'd come from. I felt a responsibility to make sure that if you got into these incredible educational opportunities, there was somebody who looked like you, who had your experience, who wore Jordans on Fridays and knew what that meant, like could actually listen to your music. Somebody who knew that, like, yep, every year in every independent school across the nation, sadly for hundreds of years, some kid is going to make a rap mixtape and they're going to use the word, and that school is going to have to handle that situation. And the handling of that situation has hurt a lot of kids that frankly look like me. And I wanted to be a part of the solution to help at least those students that were under my care have somebody to fall back on, because that happened for me and I didn't have, that support and infrastructure. Independent schools have come a long way since 1999, but that was sort of mine. So like to go in and teach and coach and live in the dorm was just passing on a gift that I've been given. So that was really, really important early in my career.
And that your teaching career took you to a couple of different schools along the way and different roles, and like you started to work your way through the different kind of opportunities that are at schools into administration and all the things. But I noticed that there was a stop along the way at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And like, how does that play into all of this? Like talk to me, like were you teaching all the way up and then went to graduate school, or were there some administrative jobs before heading to Harvard?
Yeah. So I think for me, I think this half nature, half nurture, but I'm incredibly competitive and I always want to get better. And I just got to scratch that itch. Yeah. So when I started my career off, I was teaching Spanish, and then got into Mandarin and then mathematics ultimately. And it felt like
you taught Mandarin.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to talk about all that.
Yeah. Like I gotta know that one. That's amazing. Yeah.
Go back to Harvard, then we'll go back to that.
When you get old, you have a lot of stories. But essentially, I was teaching language for a long time, and then kind of got stuck because I had a really good command of what was happening in my classroom. I knew my students, I knew what was happening, but when I had to extrapolate that to other colleagues who were struggling with the same kid but in a different context, I didn't know enough about the fundamentals of teaching and learning to be able to help, right? Because I was a Spanish major, I was an American history major, so I kind of knew my content, but I didn't know the business of teaching. And I think that's one of the things, it's a double-edged sword, because so many independent schools, early career independent school teachers just kind of come directly in from undergrad, having majored in whatever. And because, you're dealing with such a high caliber student, that student's raw firepower can kind of overlook and kind of hide, kind of obfuscate some of the learning that early career teachers need to have. So for me to be able to lead a department and division and ultimately school, I really felt like I needed to know and have a really locked in background in terms of like, how do humans learn and teach? And, in my opinion, there was no better place to learn that than, the Harvard Graduate School of Education.
Did you gain any kind of leadership nuggets? I mean, is there anything in that experience that has kind of propelled you from that point forward, or was this really trying to understand the science of teaching, like really getting
every day, right? So like, I think even as I'm reflecting in this conversation, I don't know if it's as much like a penchant for leadership as much as I just love to be in the mix. Like if there's a fight, I want to be in the middle, right? If there's a dance party, I want to be in the middle, right? If there's a good pot of gumbo, I want to be in the middle of it. So I think folks who have that sort of predisposition kind of find themselves in those rooms, right? And then that's where it happens, right? So
Brendan, this reminds me of the episode we did with Ernest Coe and Jason. So Ernest is a former kind of a similar path, worked in teaching, then moved into software development. And he talked about how, like, all the time, he just, like, somebody's like, hey, how do you do this? Or how do we do this initiative? Or how do we build this program? And he'd be like, I'll do it. Like, he just raised his hand, right? Like, he was maybe a step ahead of everybody else, but that was enough. Yeah. And that has been something that really drove his career. I'm wondering if there's something to that for you too, like just this willingness to try.
Yeah. Right. So like, I heard this a long time ago. I loved it. Like, buy the ticket, take the ride. Right. So like, just do it. And I got into Chinese, because, right, I showed up at Trinity as a 18-year-old freshman, and my advisor was the world language department chair, who also happened to be the Mandarin teacher. He forced us all to take his intro to Mandarin class, and I was like,
wow,
Dr. Fields, this is like 8 o'clock in the morning. You know that, right? This is wild. Like, I get that you're my advising and everything. But then sort of had that experience, loved it, thought it was cool, but then ultimately, kind of majored in Spanish because that made sense, and really balanced out with my athletic and sort of social activities. But then raised my hand. The Macaulay, I'd moved from Pat Valley to Macaulay. Macaulay said like, hey, we're going to transition away from Japanese to Mandarin. They asked the Japanese teacher, hey, do you want to sort of learn? We'll help you sort of transition. He said no. So he was from Japan and went home, and I said like, I'll do it. Right. And then thinking about like the high caliber, students, I'll never forget my Spanish 3 class. I had a student who was as good as me as just in terms of language. And he was 17 and I was 25, 26. I was like, ooh, you talk about ChatGPT taking your job. I was like, oh, this kid is going to take my job if I don't develop another skill, right? If I don't develop something else. So then it was like, all right, cool. Like I know enough about Mandarin to know that it's a big mountain, but I also know that I can get to the top of it. So I'll go. And then I spent 2.5 years in China and did a Fulbright. And really kind of like, it was almost like starting a car in second gear, where it's just like, remember those old kind of stick shifts where you're like, ooh, first gear is broken. My clutch is out. So I'm going to just roll down this hill, hit second gear and see if I can get it going.
Give me a push.
Exactly. Yeah. And was able to work through there. But and then once, I think for me, it was like 27, 28. Once I had, a high level of fluency in Mandarin, you couldn't tell me anything. I was like, there's nothing on this planet I can't learn without effort and real design. And that's another thing that kind of led me to Harvard, because I was like, I've been this successful on my own. Let me really go and study the cheat codes on how people learn. So that way I can apply these lessons to myself, but then also to my students.
Oh gosh, there's I'm taking mental notes of questions around Harkness.ai, but we're going to get to that. Like, there's more, like, I'm seeing some connections and I'm wondering, I've got some things I'm wondering about. Talk about becoming an administrator at a school. I mean, what drew you into that? Because I'm hearing that you've got this passion for learning and you just soaked up the opportunity to be in the classroom. What kind of pulled you out more towards the administrative track?
Yeah, I think I think one of the benefits of going to and being a part of independent schools and boarding schools in particular is that you live a seamless life. You don't really, there's no hard stop between the end of the academic day, the beginning of the sports day, or the end of the sports day, and the end of the downtime. So you see this kind of like, okay, cool. It's like happens to be 7 p.m., but I'm also sitting with my coach, who's my teacher and mentor, and all these different things. So I think you get from an early age a global perspective of what it takes to run a school. And then if you are, young, dumb, and a little bit cocky, to be like, oh, I've got it crushing my classroom. If you would just be like me, the whole school would work. Like, development, come in my class. I'll teach you how to raise some money. But like when in all seriousness, when you're trying to apply those lessons and when you start to think of like, okay, where can I make more impact on this community? Then you start to take on more administrative roles, and then thinking about, okay, if this is working in my classroom, what would it look like to work across the world language department? If that's working in the world language department, what would it look like to work across the upper school? And then you start thinking, okay, cool, like 9 to 12, I've got a good handle on that arc of the curriculum development. Like, what does it look like to incorporate 6 through 12? And then you start to think of like, all right, cool, like we're doing this great on this campus. Like, what does it look like to scale this across our school community and the citywide and start to grow? And then sort of naturally, as I started to think bigger and bigger, you need the perspective, right? And ultimately you have to be able to run a school to get that perspective to really make the institutional change that some needed.
As you go down that path, there are a lot of things that come with it, right? One of them being like managing people, one of them being, kind of thinking strategically across programs. Like, what were the things that you loved and what were some of the things that were hard for you?
Yeah, no, I think I will always say this, but I love the problems that come across a head of school's desk. They are filled with complexity, nuance, history, financial challenges. Like there's an ability to look at every single problem from so many different angles. And there is an answer that works and not always a right answer, which is really interesting. So it feels like being in the middle of a case study. And at the same time, it was one of the most stressful experiences of my life because if something got to your desk, that means it was really wrong. Right? Yeah. Like if a teacher kicks it up, that means that the department chair couldn't do it, a dean couldn't do it, a senior faculty couldn't do it, a former, like it made it through a few barriers to get. And that comes with stress that frankly had a toll on my family and frankly kind of made me into a person that I didn't want to be every day. I didn't want to show up to campus combative, waiting for like, what, a bomb's going to go off somewhere, so I'm going to be ready for it. And that made me step on the campus with a bit of an aggression and that edge that I didn't like who I was becoming. I tried really hard to hide it, but I know the most sensitive people in my community kind of sense like, oh, like, okay, like I'm going to give Brooks a wide berth today, because like you at the end of the day, the buck stops on your table. So if something happens in the parent community or the alumni community, I'm talking about like life stuff, right? Somebody passes away, somebody gets cancer, somebody loses a job, like these big, heavy things affect your school community, right? They're going to affect everybody throughout it. There's a lot to sort of harness. So again, kind of felt like love the problems, but then like that position wasn't uniquely fit for my personality. So it's like, all right, how do I keep the complexity, but then find a different role? So I'd been wrestling with that for a long time. And I'm sure we'll get to it, but then COVID was really the impetus for the edtech startup that I'm running now.
Yeah, we'll get to that in just a minute. I mean, I just want to hit pause on that head's role. I mean, that is just, especially through COVID. I mean, Brendan, you've seen it too. It's been incredibly hard on heads of school. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the independent school space, right? So Brendan and I kind of come out of that world, which is why we see so much of this, but just the pressures that are applied on a head from every different angle, and when you think it's like different than running I mean, somebody could probably pressure check me on this one, but it's from my perspective, it's different than running a company. Like if you are working, yes, you have employees, yes, you have consumers, but you're talking about kids, and the pressure that comes from making the wrong decision is immense. And like, how did you cope with that? I mean, that is like, that is such a hard thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, practically a lot of yoga, a lot of working out.
Yeah.
So like, it was incredibly important that I had rhythms, and healthy ones in particular, right? Because we're all going to have rhythms, right? Some of those rhythms are not like that third bowl of ice cream isn't necessarily a healthy one for all, but it's delicious.
It is a rhythm.
Yeah, it's a delicious rhythm.
For Brendan though, it's that bourbon in the
there we go. Not yet.
Yeah.
Not yet.
Yeah,
not yet.
Exactly right. It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, we're kind of joking about it, but like you saw an increase in people kind of self-medicating during the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
Like there's just untold or unforeseen stress, right? It's new to all of us. And then all of the sort of cracks and fissures that were already in our lives and our school communities just got a 3,000-ton elephant just jumping on those things every single day. And you saw a lot of people, I mean, I say again, with so much respect, like they cracked under that pressure, you know, and like tremendously changed a lot of people's lives and sort of surfaced some old things that people sort of had thought had gone to bed, but kind of come up. You think about interpersonal relationships. You think about, you know, people being isolated, you know, like we had a ton of early stage faculty who'd moved from wherever they were from to be in LA and then just got locked in a box in a new city, no friends, no nothing for 6, 7, 8 months at the time. You had people who had social anxiety trapped in a box. So, I mean, it's really important that we remember the early days of the pandemic, like pre-Pfizer, pre-Moderna, still banging pots in the pan. Yeah, because we're going to be dealing with the trauma of that for a while. I mean, me and the director of technology moved, you know, our brick and mortar school online over a weekend. You know, I mean, like it's all wired up. Let's flip this thing on. It works, you know? And you know, those early days of working out the kinks of sharing, and people didn't know what Zoom, and people turning themselves into cats. I think, right, we have to remember all those things because, you know, 3 years later, I think we're starting to come out and start to normalize, but now that trauma is going to surface.
100%. And you brought me back to that moment. And like, I just remember all the energy around, hey, we're going to innovate. We're going to think our way out of this problem. And I think schools did an amazing job at responding in the moment. There's no doubt in my mind. And then on the other side of it, you know, there's been conversation about, all right, well, what are we going to keep from that era? And it's just interesting to see people are like, I can't do any more innovating. Like, I think I'm just kind of done for a couple of years. So like, give me a little bit of time to heal, which I think speaks to what you were talking about. But Jason, you went the other way. Like you're like starting a startup with AI, and like, talk about that. Like, how did you know that it was time for you to transition to something like this?
Yeah. So, again, coming back to Principes non homines, leaders not common men, kind of like as the shutdown was coming, you know, as a big student of history, was like, okay, this is an inflection point. So I've got to stay dynamic in this environment. If I stay stuck, I will be lost. I know that for sure. Like, this is constantly moving, so I've got to be moving with it. You want to ride the wave, not get hit by the wave. That's just like grew up in Southern California, right? You learn that you're as a 5-year-old going to the beach. You're like, oh, yes. Getting hit is not like riding. Stay on top of the board. But kind of went through, you know, personally, my wife, my former wife, or my ex-wife, amazing woman, but our marriage was one of the things to disintegrate during the COVID lockdowns for a number of different reasons. But was sitting there being like, man, like, it is 12 o'clock and I can sit here and, I mean, just keep it 100. I can sit here and finish that bottle of bourbon and just kind of like drown my sorrows away and pretend like this isn't happening to me, but I think it is. Or I can say like, okay, here's an opportunity. And like all of the big sort of Teddy Roosevelt, man in the arena quotes, all the Julius Caesar, all these kind of things that you've thought about yourself and said about yourself, right? You banged your chest pretty hard, you know, during all these games in college, and you kind of felt yourself. And like, here's the test of your true mettle, right? Your METTLE, right? Not the METAL, right? Like, who are you as a person? And when at the bottom of your soul, when challenged. So it was like, all right, cool. Like, I have this space, I have this time. Instead of squandering it, how do I upskill, reskill ahead and then say, okay, cool, I've got this skill set, namely in the data science machine learning space. How can I apply it to solve some of the problems that we're seeing across education? And it just jumped off the page to me, right? So like met with muted mics and blank video feeds, trying to connect with my faculty and students. And again, this is so important to remember. We weren't requiring kids to put their camera on, right? And then of course, not by extension, not your mic on, because you don't want to have a ton of mics. So then you're talking to, everybody had the rings. You're like, oh my God, I've never seen that. I'm talking to a camera all day. And you're like, what's happening? I didn't go to broadcasting school. I have no idea. Like, do I look at the screen? Do I look at the camera? Like, where do I look? So there's all these things. But then I'll never forget, and this is like the little push I needed. There was a really brave young woman who said, Mr. Brooks, the baseball boys are only talking to each other. And if you don't do something about it, I will. I was like, thank you. And she had really surfaced what we all kind of groped through in person. Namely that like, I didn't like that class. I don't like this person because there's something happening here. It's how we talk to each other. I don't like this class because you guys talk to each other the whole time and I have to watch it. Like I'm not engaged here. Right. Or you talk to me a certain way, or you cut me off, or when I say an idea, you know, Tommy takes it and then you give Tommy the A, and you don't recognize my contribution. So to be able to use artificial intelligence to capture some of that data and reflect it back is something that stumbled upon in the pandemic, and is really the core essence of what we're trying to build at Harkness.
Yeah. So I really want to kind of like unpack how you've built Harkness, but before we do that, let's actually talk about what Harkness is. Like, what problem are you solving with your product?
Yeah. So humans are social creatures, right? So this is no new shock. We can do amazing things when groups of people work together. The problem is that because we come from different cultural, linguistics, temporal context, communication is ultimately the smallest unit of anything that we build on top of. And if you have a breakdown in communication, you can't operate in your highest order self, right? So even something as simple as you've got somebody on your team from Louisiana, Seattle, California, and New York. You just put those 4 Americans in a room. You've got 4 very distinct cultures. So when the gal from Louisiana says, bless your heart, and you know the person from New York is interrupting constantly, but they're interrupting as a sign of engagement, not as a sign of disrespect. And you've got the California who's like, hey, just chill it out. And the Seattle person is like, hey, we got to get it down. Yeah. Right. You've got all these different things, these different dynamics that are going underneath the language of English. Right. So then there's multiple streams of kinetic energy, right? That people stumble through, and the best groups can navigate it. The best groups can sort of surface the ways that we interact and then optimize those ways. But most people can't, and most people have no idea how to. So we're really trying to solve and give people a guide to help them be the best possible versions.
So it's a software application that schools or anybody can use to upload information. Like, what happens on the other side? You upload a recording from a meeting or something of that nature. Like, how are you processing it on your end to help people?
Yeah. So it works in person or remote. You get a high quality recording and you upload it, and within 8 to 10 minutes, you get back a whole host of information, but namely, it visualizes what happened in that conversation. So at a high level, what we do is figure out, first of all, who was talking to whom, what was said, and then now we have a transcript. And over that transcript, we run a bunch of sort of fancy AI, and just for the audience, AI is just a lot of math done really quickly. So let's not be afraid of it, right? Like that's just what it's a lot of stats, probability, and linear algebra. So like, and calculus too. So like, let's just become more fluent in math, and that I'll step off that soapbox. So once we have these mathematical relationships between people, words, tone, and all that, now we can model those relationships. We just visualize those relationships back to end users so that we can see like, all right, cool. Like when I used this word, here was the outcome. When I asked a question this way, the response was shorter or longer. And now that I have that feedback, I can start to calibrate. I can start to adjust how I show up, just the same way that humans have done when we first got glasses, when we first got a mirror, when the first time we got any sort of feedback, we can adjust, right? You're walking around naked with a deer skin being like, oh, that's what I look like? Oh, okay, great. Maybe not, right? Or like
Well,
you're working around for centuries with mustard on your face, being like, why did no one tell me I have mustard on my face? Like, well, but now with the mirror, you can do that. We have feedback for, for visual and auditory, our hearing, but now it's the first time in human history. And this is the part that's exciting, is that we have feedback for our words. I can really, we talk all the time about like intent versus impact, right? We all have great intention. The road paved to hell is paved with good intentions, right? We have all these good intentions, but we have no idea of our impact. And when you think about that, when it comes back to the lowest common denominator, namely our kids in our classrooms, I mean, I've been hurt by what a teacher said, and I guarantee that teacher has no idea what happened.
Yeah.
Right. And I've hurt kids, and I have no idea. Right.
Yeah.
So to the extent that we can surface that and correct that behavior, it's something that we're really excited about.
Well, Jason, I might need to use that at home. I have a 12-year-old daughter, and we often tell her it's not necessarily what you say, it's how you say it.
Yeah.
It sounds like that's part of it, right? Like how you deliver that makes a difference.
Yep. I mean, and our true north is like, how do we help you become a better communicator within the context of a team, right? Because if you're just a better communicator writ large, like you're going to go be a politician, right? You're going to use that potentially to like weaponize it, to like manipulate your world. But within the context of the team, if you communicate it better, you know what happens? Like the team performs better. You know what happens when the team performs better? You all win. Right. So everybody's incentives are aligned around communication. So, and it's, I mean, I've heard the quote so many times, but awareness invites change. We see in the platform, 80% of the people will correct behavior just being aware of it. Right. That's a huge margin. That's an intervention that that you don't see in any other place in our society. So just being aware, like, hey, you do this. People correct it. So
knowledge is power, right?
Yeah, that's right.
The more you know. Hey, so So you've built this product. Talk about how you've gotten to, today. Like, how did you go about building this? And what, from your school experience as a leader, like, how did that shape your approach?
Yeah. So a little bit of like dogged resourcefulness and just like the sheer will of mind and just the sheer hell or high water and everything in between. Like, this will come out of my head into the world. And I think entrepreneurs, it's been interesting to like see people shit like as a teacher, people are like, oh, that's cute. You're so cute. Like, thanks for like, it's amazing what you're doing for the kids. But I never got the praise for doing the same stuff as now I'm an entrepreneur. As an entrepreneur, people are like, oh, you're so tough. Like, you're out there changing the world. Oh my gosh, da-da-da-da. But like, when you're stuck in a room with 32 kids for 9 months on the end, you got to be resourceful. You got to figure it out. You got to figure out how to lock in and how to connect with every single one of your kids, because they're not going anywhere. You can't kick them out. You can't bail them. And then you might get lucky and have them the next year, right? So teachers and good teachers in particular are entrepreneurial, right? Where you're like, ooh, I had a lesson plan. I stayed up to 3 o'clock in the morning planning this lesson plan. I landed flat within the first 3 minutes of my class. I have 47 minutes left to go. I've got to pivot. I've got to change. I've got to do something different. I got to break these kids up in groups. These kids are sleeping. That kid just threw a whole computer at another kid's head. Like, right? Like, so like teachers are entrepreneurs and dealing with, again, the dynamism that comes in managing 32 people was something that clearly translated to what we're doing. In the entrepreneurial space. I mean, of course, the stakes are different, and you involve customers and investors and all those sorts of things. It's a little bit different, but the pieces of music certainly harmonize, because at the end of the day, it's people, and like what we're into and what I want to spend the rest of my life doing, and what I did in the previous career is how do we help and how do I help people become the best versions of themselves, whether that's having a really command of Mandarin, Spanish, or math, or whether that's being aware of how they're showing up in these spaces. And that to me is the through line. It's the same thing.
How has been, how do I say this? You're a leader now, founder at Harkness. Has that leadership been different than your leadership in the academic space?
Ooh, yes and no. So like in many ways, it's been easier, right? Because as the founder, I get to set the tone. Right. I get to leverage all these books that I've read over the course of a career to say like, oh, no, this is not just my opinion. This is the best stuff from HBS, or like, actually I've made this mistake in my, prior hiring. Here's how we're going to do hiring moving forward. Or no. Like I've seen this before. So that's been incredibly helpful. And I think one of the many challenges, in particular, a challenge of being an African-American leader in independent schools, just given that whole history, is a lot of name checking, a lot of, we don't do it that way. What do you mean we don't do it that way? I'm like the head of upper school. Like this is my job. Like, it's like literally in my second line of my job description to like have a curriculum that reflects the diversity of LA. So when you say we don't do it that way, who's the we?
Right.
It's and curious.
Yeah.
Right.
So now you have ownership, right? Now you
exactly.
Can,
so I have space to stretch out and kind of do and do the things that I think are innovative. The downside to that is that I don't necessarily have the feedback. We're a small team, right? And it's part of my job to establish a culture where it's like, look, founder CEO, that title is mostly for LinkedIn. I will crash this plane if you all don't tell me what you actually think. Like
fair.
Right? You
that's
have
fair.
to actually push back, So it's been interesting to come from one high, I don't want to say high resistance, but there's a lot of different stakeholders in the school to a small team.
What have been the challenges, with leading a small team versus leading a larger school-based institution?
Yeah, I think obviously resources have been a challenge. But it's a double-edged sword and a blessing in disguise, because constraint drives creativity, right? If you have $10 million, then what are you going to do? You're going to throw money at it. Right? When you don't, you got to figure it out, And the best part of human ingenuity is that without just to throw money at a problem, you got to figure out ways to connect and grow and get the next connection and make it to the next stage. So in many ways, it almost feels like I grew up on Nintendo and like Super Mario Brothers, and try to like, how do you figure out this level of the game to get to the next level of the game? You crash when you get to the next level, but you know the path. So it's like every single day, how do I beat this game level by level by level by level, learning everything from different bosses, right? And I'm talking about like pitching, being like, I'm going to close this deal based on my enthusiasm. Oh yeah, they don't care about your enthusiasm. They care about their ROI for their employees. You're like, all right, cool. Got to learn that, right? Because like, I think one of the things that I wish there was more synergy is that in the school space, mostly because of, and this is one of the key takeaways from COVID, is that schools, a huge role, a larger role that I wanted to admit, like they exist to take care of the problem of childcare. Right? Because going into COVID, I was really excited. I was like, oh my God, like this is the jolt we need. We're going to innovate the K through 12 space. Like this is going to be different. Oh my God, this is such a blessing. Like all these things you talked about earlier, Peter, we get to experiment. And now coming out of COVID, we're going to retain a lot of these learnings. That didn't happen, right? Or it happened in really small pockets because you got to take care of kids, right? So to be able to experiment in these new ways, and use AI is like really, really, really helpful.
Jason, besides I'm thinking about 5 years down the road. Besides a successful exit for you, where do you hope Harkness.ai is?
I hope it's boring. I hope it's boring, and I hope that everybody uses it, and the value is just normative, right? Like I hope that there's a level of productive accountability that radically transforms the way that humans communicate from now on. And I know it sounds like hyperbolic, but with the advent of, again, these historical technologies that we take for granted, human productivity takes off in the 13th century once an Italian inventor invents glasses.
Yeah.
Right. The fact that you can see that that's actually a bag rustling in the bush and not a predator. The fact that you can see a threat coming from 100 feet away. The fact that you can see the inventory that you have in your shop and you don't have to sort of squint and grope through it. It opens a whole new realm of possibility. And that's what we hope, where, people are using conversational analytics just the same way that we'd use context. Yeah. Like I can't imagine walking through my day without having my context in. Like I actually get anxiety thinking about walking around without being able to see. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And then frankly, since 2011 on Zoom, we've just kind of been like making our way through these meetings. And once the whole world kind of came on to these platforms, we've really seen a need for,
Yeah.
we've lost the nonverbal communication that happens in person, and we need to kind of close that gap. And I think AI will be it. So
I love that. And you hope that it's boring. Like, I'm just thinking about like what was innovative in the moment, and now it's just kind of a boring, regular part of my workflow. And like, I mean, I'm not embarrassed to admit, like, if I didn't have Grammarly right now, I would be screwed. But yet, like, I don't wake up in the morning like jazzed about it. I just know it's going to be there. It's going to help me, and I'm, it's a part of what I do now. Like, I love that. I think that's such a cool way to think about it.
That's right. That's right.
Hey, so we've had this really interesting conversation learning about your leadership backstory, Jason, and all the cool things that you're doing now with Harkness.ai. And I just love I just love where you're taking it. Like, I just think that you're solving a problem that needs to be solved that many of us didn't even know existed, right? And that's awareness is the start. But when you look back on your career, if you had an opportunity to do it all over again, would you take the same path, or would you try a different one?
Yeah, first, I heard once somebody tell me, you want to tell stories from a place of scars and not wounds. And given the scuffs and the scrapes that are on my body, both the ones that you can see and the ones that are in my head,
right?
I don't know if I'd change it, right? I struggle to imagine myself as a 21, 22-year-old entrepreneur with AI. I don't think I would have the emotional maturity to kind of handle the weight that it is to run a small, startup that you're trying to like change the course of the world. Like, we're not playing around with small things here. We're trying to fundamentally change the way that 8 billion people behave with one another. That's a
right.
Yeah.
So Jason,
it's a pretty big task.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
I was just going to ask, where can people learn more about you? Where do you want to send them?
Yeah, I mean, let's connect on LinkedIn, and then Harkness.ai is the place to get connected and using the tool. So those two places, like, happy to connect with folks, but Harkness.ai, that's where we live, and that's where our story's at, and that's where you can get on the platform and play with it, and kind of give us a ton of feedback, right? Because, like, one of the things that we're really passionate about is co-creating, right? We just know, or I know from Tech Company 1.0, it will not work, and we will do a ton of damage to society if we just give these powerful tools to people and say, you all figure them out, right? We know what that story looks like. We know what that story looks like with young women in developing, all sorts of, like, body image eating disorders because of social media and the lies that are told. That we know that without guidance and without collaborative accountability, tech can hurt people, and we don't want to do that. And I have no interest in doing that, mostly because it's the wrong thing to do. Second, we have an opportunity to really optimize the human experience. And then third, like, I've got to answer to my parents, right? And and this is one of the things that you come from these schools, like, it is not about me. It's not about me, Jason. There's hundreds, thousands of people whom I represent, whose sacrifice my opportunity is built on top of. The history of this country alone. There's people who fought, bled, and died for me to be able to do this. So I take it very, very seriously to be in a position like this. Harkness.ai and LinkedIn, so that we can talk with folks and making sure we're building an awesome product that is safe as well, right? As well as delivering, outside benefit.
Awesome. Well, Jason Brooks, Harkness.ai, thank you so much for sharing your story today. I learned a lot, and I know Brendan, I'm guessing you learned a lot too. And
a ton. Thanks, Jason.
Yeah. Can't wait to continue following your journey.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Leadership Backstory. Make sure to subscribe from your favorite podcast player and leave us a review if you like what you hear. We appreciate you sharing your feedback with other listeners. Peter Barron and Brendan Schneider host The Leadership Backstory. Catch you on the next episode.